Right, well, it's 7:30, so we'll get started with the main event then. So yes, we're going to have Darren, our ex-chairman and ex-professional brewer as well, talk to us. Well, help us talk about brewing pale ales.
Yeah, I was going to say I'm not doing loads of talking because I'm very unprepared.
That's exactly why we do this format, so nobody has to really prepare anything.
Yeah, exactly.
But yes, thank you for hosting this evening, Darren, and I'll leave it up to you.
Pleasure. If I have to suddenly jump off, it's because my daughter's causing chaos, so hopefully it won't take too long. Right. So, I mean, the thing I was going to start with is like the BJCP guidelines, because pale ale is quite a broad subject, really. The one I'm most knowledgeable about is American pale ale. There's so if you just search for pale ale in the BJCP guidelines, you get 79 hits. So if we just have a look, you get Belgian pale ale, and those are the only two labeled pale ales specifically. But yeah, you like English golden ale, blonde ale, they all sort of fall into similar categories. So I mean, where do we start?
India Pale Ale.
Oh yeah, India Pale Ale. Yeah, I wasn't going to quite go into India Pale Ales. God, that's a subject in itself. But yeah, good place to start is looking at the wiki. So on the wiki, we've got James has been collating basically a list of award-winning recipes. So yeah, I was going to start with Pale American Ale. There's two on there, one from myself, one from Joe. Just have a look at the recipes and see if people make theirs in a different way, and what they go for in that style. And like we'll have a look at page 33. Let's go to page 33. And we'll go through the style guidelines and see where we end up. Of course, that's not page 33. Love PDFs. Back while I just go to this one. That was 18, wasn't it? Pale American Ale. Is the text on this screen too small? Sorry, I forgot to ask that. Because I'm constantly having to make it bigger at work.
It's fine for me, but I am on the enormous screen.
Cool. Okay, so yeah, if we start with American Pale Ale, and then we can build up to stronger, less malt focused ones. So yeah, American Pale Ale, according to BJCP, is an average strength hop forward pale American craft beer with sufficient supporting malt to make the beer balanced and drinkable. Yeah, clean hop presence can reflect classic or modern American and New World hop varieties with a wide range of characteristics. The most important bit for me there is sufficient supporting malts to make the beer balanced and drinkable. A lot of the pale ales I get from commercial breweries these days don't, for me, they've gone too far the other way. They're more like just session IPAs or even just IPAs. Essentially, they're lacking the malt sort of backbone that you get in the more traditional sort of older school American pale ales. Think like Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, that sort of stuff. And that's kind of where the recipe that I put up on the wiki came from, really. So this is pretty much my only award-winning recipe. So yeah, this is it. It got second in best to show first in American Pale Ales and second in best to show way back in 2013 on the London and Southeast, now Lab Open. And yeah, so I mean, the specifics of water and stuff we can go into later. But for me, the main point with like American pale ales is actually having like a decent quantity of malt character in there. So yeah, normally start with Marisota and then have, for me, I put in at least 10% Munich 1, and then crystal malt 5%, and wheat malt for body and head retention. And for me, that gives me a pretty decent pale ale malt base. I think memory serves right, it was a hell of a long time ago. I think this was based loosely around Sierra Nevada. Hop wise, yeah, I just used Simcoe and Citra as they're one of my favorite combinations, or at least they were back then, still are really now. And yeah, that's about it on that. And if we look at Joe's,
assume that the color of this is kind of would come out similar to sort of Sierra Nevada, so kind of an amber.
Yeah, it's
rather
definitely
than
not
the
pale.
super pale that most pale ales seem to tend towards these days.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, this one definitely had a more golden sort of more towards the amber sort of spectrum. And then let's have a look at Bob the Younger. Yeah, again, Marisota. So we've got a bit of Vienna malt in this one as well. Carapils. What's the difference? Anyone know what the difference between Dingerman's Cara and Carapils Carafoam? Or are they pretty much of the same thing, just slightly roasted differently?
There's about 10 points on colour, that's for sure.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And then as does rolled oats, and some dextrose. Okay, so yeah, slightly different way. So yeah, this, I'm guessing this would be a bit hell of a lot lighter than my variant. And yeah, Joe used Verdant's yeast, so I'm guessing possibly got a bit of haze to this one. So this is more on the modern sort of pale ale variant. Just having a quick look, see if there's anything that stands out different. No. Yeah. Does anyone do anything different for their pale ales? Or is that pretty much standard?
I think it's interesting is to talk about like what people's perceptions of a pale ale should be, because before you're on, as Les was talking about his English pale ale, and obviously pale ale historically goes back to the early 18th century.
Yeah.
As a name, but are we going to talk specifically about American pale ales?
I'm happy to talk about anything. I mean, I just thought American pale ales was a good place to start because it's something pretty much everyone's probably brewed, and then go from there.
I mean, for me, I've brewed on both the sort of lighter side and similar to what you've done. I mean, the unfortunately, I've never managed to. Well, I barely ever entered them. I think certainly for a while it was sort of very difficult because half the entries in any competition would be an American pale ale, and so it was sort of difficult to do well in that area. But more recently, I did brew. I'm just trying to find it. I did a sort of back-to-back brew where I did like an old school American pale and then sort of the more new school hazy pale, just as for my own sort of interest to do them. I called them old school and new school. Let me just find it. Here it is. So yeah, it was mostly just sort of pale malt, 13% light Munich. I didn't use any crystal in it.
Yeah.
But it did still come out at sort of it's an EBC 12. I thought it was a bit darker than that personally. So it was sort of a more of a lighter amber, I guess. But had some malt character. and then was all Citra and Columbus. So bit in the boil, but sort of with 20 minutes to go, a good amount sort of whirlpooled, and then obviously a reasonable dry hop, but none of it was massive. I mean, the dry hop was 80 grams for a 20-litre batch, so it wasn't extreme.
Yeah.
I think certainly these days I've tended to go a bit more recently, I've tended to go a bit more than that, but I think actually it provided a nice balanced beer. It didn't come out grassy or anything like that. So yeah, 44, 45 IBUs, ended up at about 6% ABV. So I guess there's another question as to what's the range really for strength and things like that.
Well, it's really quite open, isn't it? So if you have a look at in the style guidelines, what does it say? So anything from 4.5 all the way up to 6.2. So yeah, quite open on that one.
So you could, in theory, like make a good one at the higher end and then enter it in that and American IPA.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's probably not far off. If you went a bit higher, you could probably get away with entering it in double IPA as well, actually, because that starts at about like 6.5%, 7%.
Yeah.
I have to say, I'm just about to brew one probably next week. I just ordered the bits. I went a bit mad and did the Bing AI and thought I'd try and use up all of the Yakima Chief hops that I kindly picked up at the open the other day. Like about 150 grams of them, the experimental one. So I've kind of done a AI one and I'm going to put Magnum in as the bitter in hop at 60 minutes, but then everything else will be the Yakima Chief experimental. But I've only gone about 5% of Munich. So I'm beginning to think maybe that's a bit low, but I've gone 5% Munich, 5% Carapils, and then the rest all pale malt, trying to just get it as light as I can and just let the hops shine a bit more.
Well, if that's the way you want it, then it's
Yeah,
a fairly
nice.
open style, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just thought it'd be a bit of fun and it would use up those experimental hops that we had. Be interesting to try it, and it was a bit of a test for the AI thing, really.
Nick, you make a really good pale ale. The Ghost Ship clone.
Yeah,
Is that
that
recipe
comes
in
out
there?
pretty good. Yeah, it's that picked up a third, or I think, at the lab open in London Southeast that we had back in Truman's Brewery. And another version. The first time I did like an American style pale ale was pre-lab open days when Richard What's His Face from Cheers used to run it, and I got runner up that year in the bitters and pale ales class. Pete Hughes actually won the class with his Riwaka pale ale. So I was very surprised to win, get runner up with mine. So I'm just looking at the recipe now. My malt bill is very similar to yours, Darren. I've got 65 pale, I've got 16% caramel, 16% Munich, and a tiny little bit of crystal just for extra colour. And the hop bill again is very similar: Columbus, Cascade, and a bit of Chinook. And fermented with USO5. So yeah, they came out pretty good. So anyway, generally they're all in pretty much the same ballpark. The difference with the Ghost Ship clone is that you've got to put in your crystal rye in there, because that's going to give you that additional sort of a complexity from the spiciness coming off the rye. And if you use the crystal rye, you also got the ability to use that for your extra colouring as well.
Okay. Didn't realise it had rye in it.
Yep. Yeah, that's and that is pucker, and that's what Adnams use as well. They use crystal rye.
Okay.
Yeah.
I have to get you to put that recipe up on the wiki.
I'll dig it out and get it out there.
So what do you think the rye, crystal rye, brings to the?
It gives you a bit of spiciness. It's not massively like sort of cooking spices and stuff like that, all that sort of Christmas spice and that, but it's just something, a touch different element to the whole malt profile and the flavor profile that it comes across. It just changes it completely. I think with the one when mine got first on the table in American Pale Ales that year, it didn't place in best of show, but both myself, Phil Turner, and Lee brewed pretty much the identical recipe because it was based on a clone recipe from the ingredients supplied by Adnams and the Anglian craft brewing guys. So the three of us had very, very similar beers. And I think overall, we were like 3 points or 4 points difference in scores between all three beers. So they were all very, very similar. And I think it was probably just a case, it could even have been just different pairs of judges that judged the beers and sort of different sort of appreciation coming out from it. But
okay. So on subject of like yeast, I'm pretty boring. I mostly use USO5 on pretty much everything unless it really isn't appropriate. Does anyone else use something different when they do a pale ale? Other than Verdant, if you're going to go for slightly hazy.
Les, what do you use in yours?
Well, mine's an English pale ale, so I tend to use Liberty Bell. I've tried others, but Liberty Bell is my preferred yeast for a pale ale.
Is that a dry yeast, wet yeast?
Yeah, it's a dry yeast.
yeah, it's Mango Drax, isn't it?
That's right, Mango Jacks.
Yeah, I've used it. That's pretty good as well.
Yeah, I
I've got
like it for most kind of English ales, bitters, pale ales, even porters. Actually, it's quite a nice. You get a little bit of ester from it, but not a lot. So it's quite. It's just a little bit more estery than a neutral yeast, and I quite like that.
That's the yeast that Mark used for his London Brown Ale.
Ah, right. So English pale ale, is that actually a defined style? No, it isn't. So
So you've got golden ale and you've got IPA,
Yeah.
and those are the kind of closest, and of course bitter.
Yeah.
But I guess if you think of an English pale ale as a very light bitter, maybe a little bit more hoppy than I mean, there's still malt there, but it's a bit more hoppy than most bitters. You kind of that. I guess the golden ale kind of covers it, but I'd quite like it to have a title of pale ale because golden ale for me is a bit more kind of sparkling, I suppose. It doesn't have to be, but in my mind it is. Whereas my pale ale is, it's kind of cask-like. It is keg rather than cask, but I only pressurize it to about 4 psi. And to me, that gives me a nice cask-like beer.
What's the rest of the recipe then?
Yeah, come on.
It's mostly Marisotta. There's a little bit of torrefied wheat for head retention. There's a bit of oats, and let me just check. I can give you some proportions in a second. Right, so what have we got here? We've got 85%, nearly 86% actually is Marisotta. There's 4.8 is Crystal 30. There's 7% oats, and there's 2.4% torrefied wheat. There's not a lot of hops, really, I suppose. I use 20 grams of Centennial for bittering. I quite like the bitterness from Centennial. I've tried several other hops, and even on my bitters now, I'm starting to use Centennial for bittering. I quite like the quality of it. It's not quite as neutral as some others. So it's kind of, I guess that some people would call it a dry bitterness. It dries your mouth more than some other bitterness does for me. And I quite like that sensation. So Centennial for bittering, and then the late additions are Olicana and Jester, only 30 grams of each. And the dry hop is 30 grams of Ernest. And then it's a pack of Liberty Bell yeast to ferment.
Is it actually finished, and is it?
Yeah, this is it. Actually, the colour doesn't come out very well on there. It's a bit more golden than it looks on there. It looks a bit too pale on there.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's I like it. It's nice. I like an English pale ale. I like that kind of cask English pale ale quality to a beer, and bitter for that matter.
So when you're carbonating it that low, do you like leave it permanently on, or do you like burst? Yeah, because
all of my beers I leave the gas permanently on.
Okay. Yeah, I used to do that, but I've lost several cans of CO2, and yeah, don't trust myself to do that anymore. So
I have, yeah, I've had that once, and I can't remember quite what it was. I think I went through a phase of using what's the name? Schrader chuck to pressurize bottles. And I left that switched on one day, and that's not got a good seal on it. And that emptied the bottle for me overnight. But other than that, it's okay. I don't have a problem with leaks.
yeah, I just need to sort my stuff out.
It is expensive if you lose a whole 6 kilograms of gas.
Yeah, especially these days.
Yeah, I lost one the other week and it was only about a week old.
Yeah, that hurts.
A whole
Yeah.
bloody cent, like 42 quid's worth. Wasn't
Right.
happy.
Does anyone have anything else to say about English pale ales, American pale ales, or should we go on to the one that probably most people know a lot about?
Well, I guess I
IPAs?
just wondered about, like, are there any other, so you mentioned Jester and Olicana. Has anybody else used any other sort of modern English hops, like, was it Harlequin, Mystic,
Oh yeah,
Ernest?
I made one with Mystic, and it was at the time it was called Mozart. I don't know what Mozart's called now. I know we had a discussion about this a few months back, and someone told me what the new name for it is, but for the life of me, I didn't write it down. So yeah, there was one called Mozart, and that came out really, really good. It was grapefruity, pithy, and yeah, they had almost American characteristics to it, and it wasn't heavily hopped, so it's really nice. Has anyone tried any of those? I've never tried Ernest.
Ernest is my dry hop in this one, so it's Olicana and Jester for the late edition, and then Ernest for the dry hop.
Yeah, I've used Olicana before. We did was it Lab's 10th birthday? We did an Olicana pale ale. That turned out nice. That's sort of almost lemony sort of flavor from what I remember.
I know Buxton or someone like that did the sort of English IPA not too long ago, and that had I think it was Mystic, Ernest, and Olicana maybe. And that was like almost American IPA. Very, very good.
So Joel's put a question in the chat. What about water profiles? I'm just trying to fire up Brew further. My computer's not playing ball. Give me 2 seconds. And yeah, I can show you the sort of things on there. Cool. Oh, okay. Oh, this was the one I actually was just talking about. American English. It was basically all English hops, hopped like an American pale ale. Yeah, and that came out fine. What did I? So for me, when it comes to change this style. There we are, American Pale Ale. So for I made a few when I was doing the brewery. And where is the water profile? Here we are. Oh, it's been so long since I've used Brewfather. Where do you get to the water profile from here? Oh, here we are. Cool. So, aim of this one was to basically the way I've mostly been using the water profile calculator on this. I've not gotten into it as heavily as some of you guys, James, for your spreadsheets and stuff. I normally just set a target profile in Brewfather and then tweak it around until I get a sulfite chloride ratio that I want. So with pale ales, I'm always looking for balanced. So yeah, and to be honest, with my pale ales, I generally don't do much to them, as the tap water here isn't too bad. So you've got a decent amount of calcium. Yeah, for me, I've just used Luton tap water straight out of the tap. I add a Camden tablet and I don't mess around with it much. Does anyone else do something a bit more detailed for pale ales?
I've got slightly different values. If you leave yours on the screen,
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you what mine are. I go for a fairly low mineral content, but balanced like you did, Darren. So I used RO water to dilute my tap water to give me an alkalinity of about 30.
Yeah.
My calcium is 50. My chloride is 59 and sulfate 63 and sodium about 25. So it's fairly soft.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, pretty much the same as mine, except yeah.
Yeah, the calcium,
less than
not
half
calcium, sorry, the chloride and sodium is kind of in the same ballpark, isn't it?
Mm.
But mine is much softer water at only 30 parts per million of alkalinity.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's why my calcium is lower as well at 50, because I don't have to worry quite so much about the hardness of the water.
Yeah. So is that what most people go for, or do you go from RO and then build up to a specific profile? Because I know you can look at the profiles on these.
Yeah, I mean, the one that I'm going to do next week, I'm just going to run off RO and then build it back up to the Brewing profile for an American Pale Ale. So just add what I need back in.
Yeah.
Helpfully,
Yeah.
I got my results from my water test at the weekend, so I know exactly what I'm at and what my RO is going to give me now. So quite useful.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, so looking at the pale ale water profile in Brewfather, like calcium's around the 150, magnesium, sodium, chloride are all about where Luton tap water is. It's only the sulfate that's quite a bit different. And yeah, alkalinity of 90. But yeah, so maybe next time I do mine, maybe I need to up that a bit. But yeah, it's been a while since I've done a pale ale. Been a while since I've brewed anything. Right. We've exhausted those. Did we want to have a chat about IPAs? Because I know a lot of you know a hell of a lot more about IPAs than I do. Yeah. So I mean, I was probably going to start by asking Jerome, the guy who brews one every week.
Every other week. Hang on.
I'm sorry, every other week. Sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah, Jerome and Jennifer, do you want to tell us about your process and what
Well, being an American IPA, we pretty well dropped Crystal. I mean, it's interesting mentioning the Crystal. There was just as an aside, there was Vinny was on I think it's Gourmet Brewing a few days ago from Russian River, and he was discussing Crystal, and apparently they phased Crystal out completely out of their beers, as apparently Sierra Nevada have been doing. There's some talk, I think, about Crystal causing problems with possibly oxidation, or there was some discussion about why Crystal malts are possibly problematic. And
yeah. What he said was that you're right about the oxidization issue, and he said that they'd gone in. Discontinued Crystal in favour of Munich, but now they'd even taken the Munich out.
Yeah.
And then the issue was brought up about Sierra Nevada, and he said that they use Crystal in everything apart from one. But he said that he knew Ken Grossman quite well, and he said that if you ask Ken, he will say they're best drunk fresh. Hence the oxidization with the Crystal manifesting itself over time. I think that was the idea.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, he was giving a shelf life on Sierra Nevada of 2 months maximum or something, I think it was. Yeah. So ours don't involve Crystal at all. It'll just be pale, 50% Maris Otter, so 50% just American pale. Sorry, pale ale malt, oats and wheat. I mean, we flaked oats and flake wheat. Occasionally, with one of our IPAs, we stick in flaked malted wheat.
That's mainly because we've got a bag of it and we need to use it up.
But that does work well.
It does, yeah.
A
bit of Munich Light I've got here.
Yeah.
Got rid of all that. Yeah, I mean, but it's mostly pale, and if we've got Maris Otter or sometimes Golden Promise, we put that in.
But these are all attempting at sort of like a New England IPA, or if it is a West Coast,
this is the IPA.
But that's the American IPA, yeah. We're using Verdant yeast at the moment, and I've been top cropping that and reusing that 2 or 3 times max. I've realised I've got to oxygenate the wort for the reused yeast, because it's got the lag time is noticeably larger on re-pitched yeast. Having said that, it worked really well.
On the hops, we do 25 of Chinook, but it's quite old because when we first started brewing, some came up on eBay, and I went and picked it up before we knew much about hops at all, and so they probably hadn't been stored very well. And
they've been in a freezer since.
Then we got a freezer, so they've been in since. But so we're just trying to use them up. So we put 25 of those in at 60 minutes, or first wort hops.
And then nothing else till the Whirlpool, and the Whirlpool's 76. I don't put them in a flame out. Cool the wort down to 76 or around that. 30-minute Whirlpool, 10-minute stand. I'm using a grain father. And a
30-minute boil these days.
Yeah, reduce the boil down to 30 minutes. That has made no difference at all in the taste of the beer at the end.
But it saves a lot of electricity.
Saves a lot of electricity. I've honestly noticed no difference on that at all. We did use a bit of occasionally use lager malt as part of the malt bill. but even that, I haven't noticed the difference with the 30-minute boil. I think that was off. David Heath did quite a lot on looking at shortening the boil time.
And that's even on, like, so your hop schedule was saying you literally 25 grams first wort hop, and then absolutely nothing till flame out.
Nothing till flame out.
No.
And
No.
that's even on like West Coast style.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, the same thing. Yeah, I mean it's yeah. I mean, I'd say for a West Coast, I'd be tempted to probably put some in at just something in at say 5-10 minutes or so.
But we don't.
Yeah.
So
Well, we don't do the West Coast that often. Yeah.
do from time to time.
And do you find that they're bitter enough, or are you not looking for bitterness?
Well, I find ours do have a bitterness. I mean, it's weird because if you're putting in enough hops in at the whirlpool, I do notice a bitterness coming through. I don't particularly like beers that have no bitterness at all. I find them, you know, they've got to have a bitterness, but I do get quite a lot coming through.
You can get plenty of bitterness from the whirlpool. I once brewed a beer that was almost undrinkable. It was far too bitter, and that was all. There was no bittering addition at all, or no late additions other than the whirlpool, and it was still too bitter. I was learning about brewing, and I thought I'd make this really hoppy beer, and I put shed loads of hops in the whirlpool, and it was almost undrinkable. It was so bitter.
Well, the one we did for Lab Open, which was 25 litres into the fermenter, we added 100 of BBC Citra and 70 of Idaho 7 in the whirlpool thing. And then I think that was more or less repeated in after we cold crashed the dry hop.
Yeah, so I don't do the biotransformations thing. So all the hops go in sort of 3 days, well, 2.5 days before cold crashing. So we always do a cold crash for at least 24 hours. But I dry hop cool anyway at 14 in order to try to avoid the dreaded diacetyl. Which has basically been my, you know, the sort of the big thing that's always been a problem with brewing those sort of IPAs.
Do you do much different, James? I know you brew a pretty mean IPA.
Oh, not really a traditional IPA. Certainly the hazy, although it's probably more of a double IPA that got the third place in on the hazy IPAs at Lab Open. That was, well, the recipe is on the wiki. It was mostly pale malt, some wheat malt, a kilo of golden naked oats, albeit I would probably back that off to 1/2 kilo now. It does lend a lot of sweetness and body. And then in terms of the hopping, I used all of the sort of Bathurst modern hop products. So it was all Citra and Mosaic, but a combination of their there you go, yeah. So the sort of pure hop pellets, the Lufa Max pellets, which are a bit like cryo, but they're sort of you only need about sort of 70% of the weight of regular pellets. And then the Incognito and Spectrum, which I use Citra, both of those, as you can see on the screen at the moment. So, and that was an exercise in stuffing as much in the way of hops into a beer that I possibly could. And also I'd not used any of those new products. So it was kind of, how does it work? How do they work? What happens when I use them? And I'm drinking at the moment. I quite like it. And yes, it's definitely the hoppiest beer I've ever made. Drinks more than 40 IBUs, but yeah, it does. It's quite boozy at sort of 7 and a bit %. there's quite a lot of sweetness in it from the golden naked oats, which I said I would try and probably back that off by about half a kilo next time.
Well,
the only
just up the Pilsner malt or the Sim.
Yeah, that or the Maris Otter, one or the other. Just compensate with it across the board. I mean, I might, or the other option would be perhaps replacing it with a half kilo of flaked oats. The golden naked oats especially add a lot of sweetness. They're almost like sort of breakfast cereal kind of taste. Yeah, quite sweet. And yeah, the only other thing I would also say with this one is that I guess I intended this to be a hazy IPA, but I think it's come out more of a double IPA that happens to be hazy. But the Yeast Bay Hazy Days 2, if you want to make a hazy beer, that's a really good. It's a blend of yeasts actually, but it's very responsive to temperature changes in the mash. Dries out nicely. I mean, this came down to 10-12. And yeah, so you can, if you mash it a little bit higher, it does finish quite a bit higher. If you mash lower, it will finish lower.
So you're saying it finished at 10-12, but still had a sweetness because of the
oats.
Right.
Oats and I said it's 7.4%, so it's quite there's quite a lot of body to it anyway. And this was brewed. Let me just double check. So this was brewed 2 months ago. Certainly it was kegged, I think, more than 50 days ago, I think. So yeah, so, and yeah, because it's been kegged, and I did the first dry hop was in the fermenter, the second dry hop was in the keg, and then I put it through, or I transferred it from keg to another, from one keg to another, to get it off of those dry hops, and yeah, it's still fresh as anything. So really good.
And what's it like working with those, with Incognito and Spectrum and everything else?
Incognito is really easy. Yeah, just with both of them, in fact, you just warm them up a little bit. The new sort of so it used to come in pots, which I think were a bit more difficult. Now it comes in these little packets, which you can just squeeze it all out of. But if you stick it in your pocket for a while, or stick it in some water at sort of 40-50 degrees, it helps sort of liquefy it a little bit more, to make it flow a bit better. And yeah, the Incognito straight into the whirlpool. Others have said with Incognito that they've had issues with it sticking to the kettle and everything else. I didn't have any of that at all. But equally, I think Mark, it might have been tried the more recent versions of Incognito and having had a problem with the previous one, and actually said the newer version is much better. So yeah, I didn't have any issues with that. And the Spectrum was literally just squeezed out like a sort of, it's like a little packet of ketchup, and I just literally squeezed it out onto the top of the Krausen a few days into fermentation, and just left it there. And I mean, it dropped in pretty quickly, along with some of the Lupamax pellets, and yeah, dissolved in really well. I mean,
Did you have to agitate it or anything like that, or stir it?
No, I think the idea is kind of that the fermentation helps mix it all in. Gotcha. I did actually give it a little, because I was worried about it all sitting on top, but actually I shouldn't have worried. It all dropped in pretty quickly, but I did actually give it a very little stir, against my better judgment, but it didn't seem to have harmed the beer. I mean, it's worth saying, like Lupamax, Spectrum and so Incognito is something like 6 times more potent than pellet hops. So 16 grams of it is equivalent to 100 grams of pellet hops. Lupamax is, I think, 70% compared to regular hops, and Spectrum is 20 grams equals, again, 100 grams of pellets, basically. Yeah, this was a case of stuff as much in the way of hop material into there that I could, and but without having as much of the vegetable matter in there.
Out of interest, because most of these products are trying to reduce losses due to the hot matter absorbing the liquid.
Yeah.
Did you get more beer out of it?
I did, yes.
All
Yeah.
right.
Because
I mean, not that that was the exercise in this case, but
well, it was a little bit as well, because it's like obviously once you put that amount of hops into it, I mean, and the thing is that not weight for weight, but sort of, even though the sort of incognito is 6 times more sort of powerful and the spectrum's 5 times more powerful, it ends up costing more compared to 100 grams of hops, but you do recover more beer at the end of it, and you get more extraction than you would do from the regular pellet hops. Because normally pellets, you drop them in and they sort of, unless you've got something special in your system, they'll sort of drop to the bottom of the fermenter and not really do much more. And obviously when you add lots of them, they just end up piling up and you don't really get extraction from them. But whereas the sort of liquidized form or even the Lupamax break apart very readily. Yeah, so that I think you get more out of them as well at the end of the day. So it definitely was worth it for me. I'll be using them again in future.
Yeah. I mean, would you be using them so on their own or with pellets? Because I read a lot of people saying they still like an idea of mixing pellets for some of that vegetable matter to give certain characteristic. Yeah,
so I've tried beers that have just used incognito and spectrum, and then I think they use some flex extract for bittering, and there was definitely something missing in it, and I couldn't tell you what. I didn't make it, but it was somebody else who was a very good brewer, and it was like, yeah, there's just something, it's just not quite what you'd expect. So there is definitely something to it. They do say in the literature for incognito and spectrum to not replace all of the hops.
Yeah.
I think there is a maximum amount you should use for spectrum, and I think also for incognito, and I was pretty much up against that limit. So I used as much of both of them as I could for the volume of beer, and also then use sort of, I mean, and that's why I ended up using like some of the Lupamax as well. So yeah, I was using them again. The only negative with them, I think, is that because they come in a little packet and it said that's the equivalent of 100 grams of hops, it's kind of, if you don't use all of it, I don't know how well the stuff lasts once opened. I think supposedly you can kind of fold it over and clip it, but I don't know whether it would last until next time I brewed with it. So it's kind of, once you bought it, you're in to use the whole lot.
What volumes do they get sold in? Is it like 20 grams or is it? Yeah,
16 grams for incognito and 20 grams for spectrum.
Okay.
Which is an equivalent of 100 grams of hops for both. So
I imagine if you ask Bath House, they probably do you an IBU full of the stuff. If you,
I mean, normally they sell it in like sort of multiple liter jugs commercially. So the new packaging is just for home brewing.
I'd be interested to know what the storage on that is, because I imagine that its storage is much better once it's been refined, for want of a better word.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it comes all packaged in the Bath House packaging, so it's not like you've got the malt miller sort of taking it out and putting it in something new, I think. Yeah. So I know that was one of the issues when Cryo first came over here, or it was first sort of distributed on a homebrew level, and that it got repackaged and it didn't survive well. So they then sort of very quickly stopped Cryo being sold by homebrew shops and instead sort of Yakima Chief package their own stuff instead. So yeah.
I like that we've got a live brewing session going on. Well done,
Yeah,
Ken.
look at Ken. Is this trying to go again, Ken, after the crystal Weizen issue?
Yes. I'm not going to talk very much because probably at any minute a train's going to go past. So I'm just listening in the background.
I'd see you got back on the horse straight away.
Yeah, gotta.
Good luck.
Can't figure out how to put it back on mute though.
We'll just not listen to you, Ken.
Where the bloody hell's the mute button gone?
Just wobble the mouse about in the bottom left corner of your screen.
Well, I'm on my phone.
Ah,
What's he up to?
Just
Sorry,
ignore me, please.
We try to.
hang on, I can mute you. There you go,
There you
you're
go.
muted.
FaceTime with your parents. Which button do I press?
Ken was just filling in for Darren.
Sorry, I
Also-
just had to go and see the little one.
I also like that Rob G seems to have a picture of Ken behind him.
No, it's
Well,
Anthony.
I'm not sure Anthony will like that.
How is it?
I mean, is anybody else like, in terms of like, do you brew like anybody else brew double IPAs or any of the other kind of IPAs? I've got a Belgian IPA in the fermenter at the moment, which is going to be interesting.
Lots of doubles. But you have to, one thing I learned very quickly is you have to dial down any specialty malts very, very quickly because, yeah, the base malt just ends up giving them so much malt flavor very, very quickly. So in fact, I think for the ones I brew, I also chuck in a load of, I swap even the base malt, I swap out for lager malt in an effort just to reduce the malt character. Where are we? When there's, yeah, so I've brewed a bunch of doubles between, well, they're all about 9 to 10%, a bit punchy. Maybe that's why I had issues with base malt flavors. And yeah, probably where are we? 70-30 pale to lager. There was a bit of wheat in there as well, and nearly 10% dextrose in order to keep them sort of as drinkable as possible. And then hop wise, I think I'm shooting for about, what's the IBUs on this? Oh, it's a
Was
long.
this a double IPA or a triple IPA?
This was double, but there was definitely the punchier end of double. Oh, crikey. Yeah, bitterness. That's going to be theoretical, surely. Somewhere between, okay, so these were, yeah, anywhere between sort of 90 and 120. And usually, but probably my hopping, I go for at least 50% of them are sort of old school C hops, just because I think I like, you know, West Coast doubles, and sort of I think that sort of piney resin makes them more drinkable than the sort of the, you know, the fruitier versions. So
Yeah, I agree.
but that's definitely personal preference. But again, like some other people have said, I definitely like, you know, and obviously as the stronger these beers get, you know, I do like a good, nice bitter bite at the end of them to keep you coming back for more. And I think I'm mashing long and low for these. I'm just trying to see what temperature. Sorry, it's been so long since I've used this brewing software. Oh dear, it's going to be a disaster when I go back to it. Blimey, I'm going to make you look good.
It's like riding a bike.
Bet you can't wait to
Yeah,
get brewing again.
tell that to Daz.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I go for, like, I'm looking final gravities at, 1006, 1005. I'm getting them down as low as possible again, just to try and take the body out of the beer and just make them as drinkable as possible.
Yeah.
What sort of volume are you making of like a double IPA? Are you making 40 litres, 20 litres?
Oh, actually, no. So my normal brew length would be 40, and then with a beer like this, I probably drop to 30 by the looks of it. Yeah, 30 litres.
How long does that last? Because I never brew like IPAs or double IPAs, because like a keg for me lasts months, at least 3-4 months.
Probably doesn't last as long as it should do. Yeah, I do like I do like these beers. Yeah, very few of them reach the end of the road, although a lot of these I wouldn't even enter for competitions either, because I find them sometimes a bit fragile. Although I've had a bit of success on swaps. Funnily enough, that triple IPA I did end up keeping a load of, because it was just too bitter and abrasive. I found it in the end. And where are we now? What's that? 2 years down the road, it's now an American barley wine. It's great.
Nice.
You rebranded it.
Absolutely.
And triple IPA is they're a bit thick and a bit sweet most often. But same as you, Ian, I tend to dial off all the crystal and so on. So it's mostly Pilsner,
yeah,
bit of Marisotto, a bit of oats, a bit of wheat, but mostly Pilsner actually.
Yeah, and I think again, long low mashes and loads of yeast and really getting, having a very low final gravity when you've got a beer that big. Sometimes I think I've had it very, very low, 1003, stuff like that, and you think, Jesus, is going to be really, really thin, and it's not at all.
Sorry, what temperature were you mashing at?
Ooh, am I doing steps for these? Where does mash infusion? It can't be right. Oh, here we go. 65. 65. Right. And some of these I've done overnights on, looking at it. Yeah. 65, and then I'd probably work it up. So 65, maybe probably a few hours actually, and then I'd probably work it up at the end to higher temperatures. But yeah, long and very low. To be honest,
you'll say overnight, right? Say
yeah. I mean, to be honest, I do a similar thing even for my barley wines, just because again, I still for my tastes. Otherwise, I just find them too thick and syrupy, difficult to drink a pint of. Yeah. Maybe that's the idea.
We thought we were doing a long time when we moved up to 75 minutes. Gosh.
I think mine is 60 minutes for the
Well, that's what we always used to
mash.
do. Yeah.
Then do another half an hour at, I work in Fahrenheit, so 152 for the main mash, 161 for another half an hour, and then 170 for another 20 minutes.
So that's sort of like you're doing a mash out.
Three-step thing.
The 170 is mash out.
Yeah.
I think I was trying to break up. Actually, I think I tried it once, twice, but it was more the aim was actually to break up the brew day. So I was mashing in at sort of 10 or 11 o'clock, and then getting up and just bringing it up to temperature, and then going straight into the ball. So I found I could knock off, well, yeah, obviously an hour and a half, 2 hours, whatever, off the brew day, which was, or spread it out anyway.
Yeah, and you're increasing your efficiency. So.
Yeah, I don't. The main effect, like I say, was on. I always noticed it gave me a really good, gave me a really good finishing
Body.
gravity.
Right.
Um,
That's there because that is quite low. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, ours are all sort of 12 to 17.
Yeah, mine are about 16 for a double IPA. But if you're mashing for a long time, you give
Yeah.
those the beta amylase a long time to nibble away at the ends, I suppose.
Yeah.
hmm.
I missed that bit. Was that like mashing overnight or something?
Yeah,
Yeah.
Okay.
never thought of that.
Mhm. Let's go on. Tell us about your triple IPAs, Ian.
Oh, crikey. Not even. Well,
Did a presentation on
memories,
those.
is it?
I mean, these, most of my doubles, actually looking at them, were between 9 and 10, which is, I mean, I always think of a double IPA starting at 8. But by the time you push up towards 10%, you're pretty much there anyway, aren't you? So I've only brewed a couple of them. The first one was the most successful, which was 10%, and that was really good actually. It was just, I think I submitted that for a swap and got loads of feedback that it was like a Jaipur on steroids. But then the one I brewed a couple of years ago, I just didn't think was anywhere near as good. It was just a bit thicker, and in fact, I was trying a whole load of sort of Flex and some of the new hop products. But yeah, I wasn't very happy with it. It just didn't. It just tasted just a bit rough, and the bitterness was not very nice. It was quite grassy. Yeah, it just didn't work out anywhere near as well. But yeah, it's basically the same sort of techniques that we've just been talking about. So again, you knock out any malt except for something very simple, and you mash very low, very long. Did we play around with enzymes for these, James? But I think I might have been using.
I didn't, but you might have done. I thought about it. I mean, mine was slightly different to yours in that mine started off at a gravity of 1108, finished at 1022, which made it 11.7%. But with estimated 211 IBUs, it kind of balanced things out a bit. That's where you take like a bottle of Flex and just upend it into the kettle. Yeah, so I used a Flex extract for bittering, and then some Columbus, and then sort of a Whirlpool, Simcoe, Centennial, and Columbus, and then double dry hop with each of those as well. And yeah, so dried it out from the malt bill was mostly just pale ale malt. I did have some dextrin and caramel in there. I don't know if it's really needed. I'm going to revisit that in future. But there was also quite about 7% dextrose to help dry it out a little bit. And yeah, so it did dry out, but it was American barley wine-ish, albeit without the aged character.
Sorry, what was your finishing gravity? That was quite high.
1022.
Oh.
But yeah, it's with the high level of bitterness, it does sort of balance it. And yeah, we did the presentation about it last year.
Yeah, it was back in January. I just found it on the wiki.
So yeah, the recipes and everything is on there. But I mean, I didn't do it. I think I might have done a 90-minute mash. I think I've written it down here. The first time I did it was a 90-minute mash, then a long sparge for an hour and a bit. Yeah, and really happy with the way it came out. Like Ian, I used all this sort of old school Columbus, Centennial, Simcoe hops, because it just, the pininess of them sort of works well. Mine was modeled after Pliny, I think it's Pliny.
Pliny if you're in the UK, Pliny if you're in America.
Okay, so Pliny the Younger.
I mean, the trouble is, Vinny invented it, therefore I suppose he should have the last say on how you pronounce it. But In my Latin, it was Pliny.
And yeah, and then the main thing about that as well was I made a pale ale to bring it back around to produce the yeast to ferment this whole beast, and so I made the sort of a pale ale about a week before, and yeah, then took most of the yeast from that to ferment this one, which keeps it nice and smooth.
It's worth that Vinny interview on Gourmet Brewing. Doug Piper, I think, does it. It's about a week ago. It was all about dry hopping technique, and in that was where Vinny was talking about his use of crystal or not, because he's dropped all his caras and so on, all the cara pills and so on.
You mentioned that earlier on, like they said they're not even using Munich anymore.
Yeah.
So they're just all pale malt and all base malt kind of thing, bit of Vienna or something.
I think it'd be Vienna. Yeah, I think Vienna was possibly what he'd got left. Yeah, it's an interesting interview because it's the interesting mainly in the completely change in the ingredients that go into what people consider a classic beer.
And he was emphasising how they evolved the recipe. It's still called Pliny, as he called it, but it's completely changed. But gradually over the years, it's just totally changed. And Sierra Nevada do the same thing. They change the recipe gradually, which is interesting. You'd sort of expect it to be exactly the same, but it's not. They change it according to sort of current taste.
I've got a recipe for Heretic Evil 3 from Jamil. So I need to try that. I was intending to try that for my next triple IPA.
Right.
Is that more of the same, just straight up pale malt and?
Yes, mostly pale malts and dextrose, and there is something else in there as well. But yeah, I can't need to go back. He had something else in there, like it was using a sort of a craft maltster. So I need to go and look up what the equivalent was for here. But yeah, I'll
not chit malt or something.
No. It was a specific malt they were using for it, but I'll look it up and then let people know.
I remember hearing an interview, I think it might have been with Mitch Steele, and this was years ago, and he was saying about the caramelts, the crystal issue with oxidization and moving away from all of that. But then I heard a more recent one, about recent couple of years ago, probably still, and he was saying that one of their double IPAs, I think it was double and not triple, he said they had a very popular one with customers, and then they had changed their fermentation profile to make it smoother and basically make it so smooth that you couldn't taste the alcohol in it. It was very, very subtle, which you do get them. You pop a tin of some of those things and you're like, good grief. And you're wondering whether they've made a mistake on the percentages. And he said the customers preferred, they changed it back to something where you could taste the alcohol more, because the customers wanted that sort of alcohol bite in that strength of beer. And I do get that, because otherwise you're left with a beer that effectively just tastes like an American IPA, which is then way too quaffable.
Yeah.
Interesting. You had the same. I had the same thing actually with a Russian Imperial, 12%, and you couldn't taste the alcohol in it. It was nitrogenated, and the judge said that it didn't have the Russian Imperial flavor, the character, because it was too smooth, and I didn't get very far with it.
Too smooth.
It was too smooth. Yeah, it can be too smooth, and then it's not what people are looking for anymore.
Wow.
Yeah, I thought the same.
Yeah.
Always need to enter that one in another competition. See if you get different feedback. Sometimes it's just the luck of the judges you get.
Yeah, when you're brewing a big beer, you want to know it's a big beer. I mean, otherwise, what's the point?
Yeah, I think so. Although I struggle to imagine knocking a beer in a competition for it being too subtle and too smooth. You know, but yeah, I agree. It's probably more of a personal taste thing.
You still know it's strong because you wake up a few hours later with half a glass still by your side, thinking what
That's
happened.
too late then.
Excellent.
Right. So we've pretty much done the gamut of pale ales and IPAs and those sort of things. I mean, do people have like one particular thing that they always emphasize when they're brewing these sort of styles? I mean, it probably varies from depending on what sub style of pale ale or whatever you're doing. I mean, yeah, for me with American pale ales, no, it's all about the balance. Whereas I guess, what do you look for when you brew your IPAs, Jennifer? Is it like just hops in your face, or?
Well, basically, we do American IPAs and we do NEPAs, so we sort of alternate. Basically, because of his fermenters, the Blickman will take something with lower hop content, whereas the BrewTech is okay with higher hop content because it's got a dome top and it works better. Sorry, what was the question again?
Like, is there one? What's the one thing you've done to like improve your IPAs as you've gone along, or is there?
I think one major thing we did was because we used to just go from the we went into the fermenter, then we did a dry hop, and then we cold crushed, and then we kegged the beer. But we then discovered soft crushing, where you sort of get it down to 14, 12, whatever, before you dry hop, to get rid of sort of hop bite and all those sort of problems. And that worked quite well. So we've always done that sort of for the last couple of years. Temperature control is the main thing. I mean, that's the biggest thing that improved things after having a disaster where it just went too cold and everything went totally wrong. So that's why we got 4 fridges with temperature control. Between us, this is with RAF up in London and us down here.
So is everyone doing like oxygen-free transfers and stuff like that on their pale ales these days? Or no?
No, if you're brewing something that's hop laden, then I think that's pretty much essential. But most of the beers I brew are not that hop laden. So for my pale ales, I don't need to worry. I'm as I said, with this particular one, it was 90 grams altogether. So sorry, let's do a little more. 20 grams for bittering, 30 grams of each of 2 hops for late additions, and 30 grams for dry hop. But it's not very much.
Yeah.
So I don't
And
need
is
to
that
worry
for a
about
sort
it.
of 25 litre?
It's a 20 litre, 20 litre
20,
corny
yeah,
keg, or
yeah.
19 litre corny keg. Yeah, but I
Yeah.
brewed 20.
Right.
And like the triple IPA you brew, James, like, have you noticed it change over time, or did it all go far too quick to notice?
So the first time I brewed it, I intentionally brewed it with an intent to give it most of it away to lots of other people. So yeah, that went pretty quickly. So it was gone within a sort of month or so of kegging it. Second time wasn't as good a beer. Yeah, that went eventually. But I will brew it again, and then we'll see. Yeah, it's kind of a once a year beer, I think.
Yeah, the amount of preparation and expense.
Well, having done like the hazy IPA recently, that was again very expensive. It's not really that bad, if I'm honest. It's like more malt and said a few extra, some more bitterness, and that's about it really. But it would be a similar level of everything. I mean, I had to do with that one. I do the second dry hopping in a keg which has a filter in it, so I can then after 2 or 3 days transfer it to another keg to get it off of the hops. But yeah, so it's an amount of work, but it's fun. I need to put it into a competition and see if I get the same feedback as Les. This beer's too good. Need to put it in a category that allows for good beers.
Now, apparently it can be too good. It can be too good, and it's not good anymore. It's back down. I did have some good experience or good outcomes using antioxidants. I might have mentioned this before actually, but I didn't quite get to the end of the story with figuring out which of the things I put in worked. This is on a very hoppy beer. It was something like 400 grams of hops in a 19-litre batch. And I used, as part of the fermentation, or in the fermentation, I put rose petals, lemongrass, and some geranium leaves. And that didn't use any closed transfers or anything like that. I did use mash hopping. And 8 months later, that beer was still fresh. So something, I'm not sure if it was the lemongrass, the rose petals, or the geranium leaves, but one of them is a really good antioxidant. And I just need to repeat the experiment, but with perhaps 3 batches. I don't know if it needs all 3 of them or if it's one of those ingredients that really worked as an antioxidant. And it was really fresh for months.
What sort of quantities are you talking? Did they like affect the flavour of the beer or?
No, they didn't. That was the disappointing thing. I was actually looking for, it was part of a biotransformation experiment, and I was trying to take advantage of the biotransformation processes, and these 3 ingredients are very high in some of the precursors for thiols. So that's what I was really looking for, was those thiol flavors. But what I discovered was some magic combination to keep your beer fresh. It wasn't a lot. It was only a few grams, tens of grams. I could look up the recipe, but it was tens of grams, like 30 grams, something like that, of each. Maybe a little bit more of the lemongrass, because I think I used 3 or 4 sticks of lemongrass just chopped. And then it was about 30 grams of rose petals and geranium leaves. But it did a good job of antioxidants. Just wish I knew which one it was.
Never thought about putting anything like that. But I've had a beer with lemongrass in before, and that was quite nice. But yeah, never thought about putting anything else like that in there.
Well, lemongrass is
you
packed
couldn't
with
say
all the
that.
things that we look for in hops. You know, kind of all those geraniol, all of those things. Lemongrass is absolutely packed with those. So you'd think somehow I must be able to utilize that stuff and get the flavor out of it. I didn't. Maybe somebody else could be more successful.
You couldn't taste anything of the lemongrass, even the sort of the standard lemongrass flavors, let alone anything transformed.
It was a hoppy beer, so maybe it was just kind of lost in the melee of all the hoppiness, but nothing that I could distinguish as specifically lemongrass, I don't think. I don't recall that anyway.
You quiet guys like Mark, Arthur, and stuff, and Stu. Yeah, do you brew any pale ales, IPAs, or anything like that?
Well, I was just flicking through some old recipes, seeing what we haven't really spoken about. And recently, I have done a Kvike, sort of New England pale ale, and that turned out really well, really hazy. Just have a quick look at the recipe. Where'd it go? Yeah, it's like a mix of basic Pilsner Marisotta, 15% wheat, 4% dextrin, 4% flaked oats, and then hop-wise, nothing until the whirlpool, and then just load up just a load of hops I got from Cross Maloof, basically as like a blend, about 8 grams a litre, for just under actually. in the whirlpool, and yeah, it turned out really well. Really, really hazy. Well, it finished quite high though. I think about 2016, 17 it finished quite high. But very nice.
You were using Kavaiki, so what was the fermentation?
Yeah, it was Voss, and I was too scared because, like, you know, it just went against me. You know, everything that I've learned about brewing to brew it at like 30 degrees. But I think in the end I did it about 28, I think, and I was just like, this is just bonkers, you know, like trying to turn up the dial, you know. So yeah, so I probably could have gone higher, but yeah, I think I was down and done it about 28 in the end.
Right.
But
And which like variant of Kvike was that?
Boss.
Oh, okay. Normally they dry out quite nicely.
Yeah, I think I had trouble with conversion, but I think even after an hour and a half mashing, I saw the iodine test wasn't to my liking. So I'm not quite sure what went wrong there, but so that's probably why. Probably some starches and whatever still left in there, but it went down nice. It disappeared very fast though. About 6.6%, I think it finished in the end. But.
Well, it's good to hear. I'm going to use Voss in the APA I'm going to do this week. So on the grounds that my fridge is full and can't get my fermenter in there, so I figured I'd stick it in the attic and let it just bobble away like crazy.
It does go nuts.
Take advantage of the warm weather. Yeah.
Absolutely. The only other one I've done before, I did an English with Olicana and Jester, which came out all right. I did that for the Bexley Beer Festival. Which did okay, didn't place, but it scored 30 plus, so I was quite happy with that. And it tasted quite nice. It was a little bit hazy, that had verdant in it as well. Quite pleasant. Haven't done that many others, so still playing with it a bit, really.
I'm about to use Kavaiki for the first time. Never had any experience of it with small batch brewing. The aim is to brew 5 litres and put it in a demijohn. There's not much headspace in the demijohn. When you say it goes mad, does it go mad Krausen mad, or just a lot of bubbling?
Yeah, both.
Lots bubbling. Obviously I've got stainless steel, so I don't quite know how high it went, but it didn't come out the top, so I know that. But 3 days it was done. I mean, although I left in mine for 7 in the end.
Yeah, I've only used Lutra, and yeah, that has quite a Krausen on it. Yeah, it was in the 34 litre fermenter, and yeah, it was probably a good Krausen that size. So yeah, you probably want a bit of headspace, or put it in a bucket.
Or pressure ferment it if you can. That tends to keep the Krausen down.
Yeah, can't do that in a 5 litre demijohn though.
No.
That might not end well. So what are you brewing with it, Paul?
I don't know. Since it's just my first, it'll be a stovetop brew. I'll just go for something sort of pretty basic. Yeah, I've also just got a 5 litre pressure container as well, so maybe I could pressure ferment it in that. Who knows? Yeah, so just a basic bog standard brew, just to get the technique right, and then take it from there.
So Rob, tell us about your pale ales.
Yeah, it's not something I brew very often, to be honest.
Yeah,
it's the palest pale ale I've done. I don't know, maybe a crank one or something like that, but nothing with any huge hop character, I suppose, but or at least nothing that's come out very well.
Oh, I can't think of anything else to ask people. Has anyone got any?
It just seems to be that the pale ale category seems to be rather broad and sort of not particularly well defined. I mean, we've started with the whole thing about the BJCP guidelines, and it does seem a bit odd that you can get the word, say, pale ale turning up in how many was it? 17 or
Yeah,
whatever.
quite a few places. I mean, officially, there's only 2 that are labelled as pale ale, but
Yeah, yeah. But a pale ale can fit into quite a few categories.
yeah.
It seems to be a very broad category.
Well,
Yeah.
historically, it's like pale ale just meant it was made with pale malt.
Yeah.
So it was dried over coke, I think, or something originally, rather than sort of a wood fire, which would cause the beer to cause the malt to darken and sort of take on a smoky character. So yeah, the pale ale dates back to early 1700s, and could apply to anything really, even a porter. So yeah, it's a very broad term. I think obviously these days it's sort of co-opted for American pale ale, something hoppy and pale. Cool. Well, if we're all tapped out of things to talk about pale ale, then I will say thank you very much to Darren for running this evening's discussion.